Hello everyone, my name is Paula Hancock and I lead the Cyber Threat Intelligence team for BT. It's a pleasure to be here today, so thank you to CREST for having me. Today I'm going to talk about how organisations can build threat intelligence into their business to efficiently add value. Now, how many times have you heard that from a sales pitch before? There's so much talk about threat intelligence these days. Does anyone actually know what it means? Does anyone know how to do it properly? So today we're going to dig deeper into how to do threat intelligence and how to do it well. So hopefully I'm going to take it out of the trough. If you're an organisation that's looking to consume threat intelligence from a third-party vendor, or if you're a threat intelligence provider, I hope today this talk will help you to be able to encourage your customers of threat intel to understand what threat intelligence is and how to ask for it properly. So where should we start? And what do I mean by out of the trough? So originally I titled this presentation, Out of the Trough of Disillusionment and Up the Slope of Enlightenment. So even I can't get it right, which is why I cut it short. But that's essentially what I mean. And this is Gartner's hype cycle, which shows the stages that new products, services, ideas and technology go through in their life cycle from conception to maturity and widespread adoption. So I'm going to use this analogy to talk about how threat intelligence as a service has gone through this cycle and the impact that it's had on its use, its reputation, the value that it provides, and also how organisations can ask just a few educated questions to get the best out of their data and the vendors that provide that service. Threat intelligence has become one of the most popular buzzwords of the last 5 years, alongside others such as big data, artificial intelligence. It's become a must-have for businesses to protect against cyber attacks. And organisations such as the police and the military have been doing this for years, for decades. But in the world of cybersecurity, it only really became a thing about 5 or 6 years ago. And compared with government and law enforcement, cyber threat intelligence in the commercial environment is still a relatively immature discipline, and it's also the subject of much vendor hype. So in recent years, the number of vendors offering threat intelligence as a service has grown, and organisations believing that hype, thinking that threat intelligence would solve everything, and they possibly couldn't do without it, have gone and rushed to fill their gaps with threat intelligence, which in reality, sometimes, I'm not saying this for all vendors, but sometimes in reality they're little more than just a list of threat indicators that nowadays become quickly outdated and useless because criminals adapt so quickly to our defence improvements. The reality is you need to do a whole bunch of work before you can just plug and play. Threat intelligence isn't a plug-and-play type service. And trying to run before you can walk wastes energy and resources. And let's face it, it makes you a target, not just for cyber criminals, but for overzealous cybersecurity salespeople. So once they've got their feeds, organisations then start to question the effectiveness of those feeds that they've invested in, because either it doesn't alert them to the things that they thought it would, or conversely, it creates so much white noise, it's virtually impossible to work out what's good and what's bad. So after all the hype and the peak of inflated expectations, the inevitable disappointment follows. And this is the trough. So now there are so many vendors in the threat intel market claiming to offer a holistic approach to threat intelligence. In reality, there's no one-stop shop solution. It's really, really difficult for companies to navigate the minefield of threat intel providers. The range of content and expertise means it's virtually impossible to compare services and match them against their needs. So their needs actually is really important, and their needs are most likely to be misunderstood. And even the term threat intelligence is quite widely misunderstood. What vendors claim to provide might not necessarily align with an organisation's expectations and their own interpretation of threat intelligence. So how do we get out of the trough? So I think the first step is for us to all start off on the same page and check our own understanding. What is threat intelligence? And I know I'm probably preaching to the converted here in this room, but I think it's really important that we do get on the same page in understanding what threat intelligence is. So for me, and for us in BT, we take Gartner's definition. Threat intelligence is all about knowledge. It's about knowing your adversaries, their capabilities, their infrastructure, their motives, their goals, their resources. A bit of a Sun Tzu approach, it's about knowing your enemy. If you understand the risk to your organisation, you can really know how to defend yourself and to do that in the most efficient way. You can't protect everything, but you can use this knowledge operationally, tactically, and strategically to protect your network. So, as I say, threat intelligence means different things to different people. Like I say, we use Gartner's definition, which shows it's all about evidence-based knowledge. So in order to protect ourselves, we need data and we need information. For some, that might be a feed of indicators plugged into your SIEM, something we might call technical intelligence. For operational teams tasked with defending your organisation, it might be details of an impending attack, something we might call operational intelligence. For others, it might be details of an emerging trend that their organisations need to be aware of and to plug any gaps, which might be an example of tactical intelligence. Or it might be an assessment of risk for a senior leader to decide where to allocate resources, what we call strategic intelligence. All of these are forms of intelligence, but it's important to be aware of the types of threat intelligence that your customers and your clients need and are looking for. And I think there's a lot of organisations where a lot of organisations get stuck because they focus a lot on the technical intel, and that's the feeds of data without the context behind it. So without going into too much detail, and obviously with the people in the room, excuse me, the types of intel, we really should be aware of the different types in terms of strategic, tactical, operational, and technical intelligence. And there are different types, different people probably producing these different types of intelligence, and importantly, different consumers of that type of intelligence. So strategic intelligence might be information on changing risk, which might be relevant to the board. You might want to use this in your organisation to understand the wider threat landscape or the bigger picture to justify increases in budget. You might want to use tactical intelligence for architects and sysadmins to look more in depth at attacker methodologies, their tools, their tactics and procedures. And they might be able to then make an assessment on the detection and mitigation capabilities of the organisation and implement those in order to provide protection. The output of tactical intelligence might be something like an adversary profile, for example. The people in your organisation that are responsible for defending your organisation might be operational intelligence users, and understanding the details of a specific incoming attack will help them to be able to respond more effectively than purely reacting. So that includes perhaps your vulnerability management teams who can use this information to make changes to firewalls, to protect and prevent further activity. The output of that is less likely to be along the lines of formal reports, more likely to be incident reports or feeds delivered straight into security operation teams. And then lastly, you've got technical intelligence. So this is where incident responders, SOC staff, for example, are likely to use technical intelligence, likely to consist of indicators of specific malware, and they can use this to identify incidents within the network that need handling. And the output of that is probably going to be fairly automated and include activities like augmenting and improving firewall rules, network access control lists, etc. But I think what's important to understand is that it's not always about attribution. And that might just seem a little bit odd compared to what I've just been saying in terms about know your enemy. Knowing everything that you can about your enemy so that you can defend yourself. But it's not just about being able to identify the offenders. That's not always going to be the outcome or the objective. It's about understanding that intent and that opportunity, and then applying that knowledge to review your defences and mitigations in order to understand and therefore prioritise where changes need to be made. So it's as much about looking at yourself as it is about understanding your attacker. Prevention within business is better than cure. Targeted prevention is even better and is more effective use of your resources than trying to plug every single gap. You can't prevent everything. So you do need to prioritise based on risk, so the likelihood of something happening versus the impact of a successful attack. And to do that, you need to understand what it is you have that an attacker might want. And you need to understand the methods that they may use to get it. In a sense, it's knowing much more about yourself, as I say, and what an attacker might want from you as much as knowing the attacker themselves. And one of the ways you can work out the various ways in which attackers might get at you is to use the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Used in the right way, that's a really good example of how you can generate tactical intelligence and prioritise your threat defences and mitigation. So using the ATT&CK framework to map your data and your capabilities and understand what your defence and mitigation capabilities are. It's a great way of using tactical intelligence and mapping their capabilities against your own defensive capabilities, working out where the gaps are, and then being able to provide that focus to your work to plug any loopholes. And the way that we've approached the framework within BT is that we've mapped our data visibility against the framework to understand and be comfortable with what we can and what we can't see. From that, we can then work out our current capabilities in terms of detection and mitigation. And if there's a whole lot of red stuff on that chart, on that matrix, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you overlay the intel picture to say that actually there's a whole host of stuff on there that's red in terms of our visibility, it might not matter if there's intel to say that actually it's hardly ever used because it's really quite difficult to exploit. That should probably make your risk managers slightly more comfortable. So you don't necessarily have to turn the whole framework green to be comfortable, but what you do need to understand is that if your visibility and capabilities are red, how quickly can you turn them green if some new intel emerges, which highlights the fact that an APT group, for example, has just started using that particular technique and their target is your industry or your organisation. Then you've got to be flexible and adaptable to make those changes quickly. But in essence, it helps you to prioritise the things you need to be worried about based on risk, and that's what threat intelligence is all about. It's a unique skill set, and to do that, it requires expertise. You don't just get all of that in a feed. You don't get the risk from a feed. You don't get the why. And all of this is a problem because cyber threat intelligence profession at the moment, a lot of organisations and consumers of threat intelligence think they're covered because they have a feed. I just want to touch on the skills aspect briefly. And I know that's not really the point of my talk, but it's important when we talk about threat intelligence as a profession. It's not something new. The skills gap is not new. But actually, as a profession, we are really good at facts because we're proper technical people. We're comfortable with precise conclusions, things that fit neatly and follow a process or a code. But actually understanding motivations is much more difficult. And as a profession of technical experts, we're really good at the descriptive, mechanistic analysis, if you like, of data, understanding how an intrusion progressed, the what. So, and how does a piece of malware operate, for example? But the interpretation, the interpretive stuff, the why, the predictive stuff that tells us why, maybe even who, we kind of suck at that. So when I ask various analysts around, why are they doing this? What could they be after? Often I just get a really blank look. And honestly, it's almost like I talk a completely different language sometimes. So, and I think the reason why is because they've not developed a hypothesis in which to test. They haven't looked at all of the different possible options and weighed them up against each other. And I'll tell you a little story. So when I was an intelligence analyst working in the police, my sergeant said to me once, he said, Paula, I really like your analytical reports, because he said at the end of it, your recommendations, you actually state an opinion. You actually state what you think. Whereas all the other analysts just give me a list of options and say, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. He said, but I like yours because you actually state what you think. And I didn't correct him at the time, and I didn't say, actually, do you know what, it's not just what I think. There is stuff behind that as to why I've thought that conclusion, and that's based on evidence. There is actually a process behind why I've come up to that conclusion. It's based on something, and that something is a bit of a process in testing hypothesis. That's kind of how traditional intelligence analysts like myself formulate conclusions. We generate hypotheses, compare and contrast, seek more evidence to support and refute a theory, and work from there to build your theory into evidence. It's not guesswork. It's actually based on something, and we're confident in our conclusions because we've tested our theories. So there is a need, and I think there is a need for formalising the threat intelligence discipline, which is why I'm really keen on the work CREST is doing to provide accreditation. But intelligence analysis is a skill in itself before you even apply the subject of cyber. And I think it's a function that sits between IT and business operations, which means the skills required to incorporate both technical knowledge and analytical expertise are really difficult to find. Do you train intelligence skilled professionals and transition them into the world of cyber, or do you train IT security experts in intelligence? Which is best? Well, I think you need both, because I think each will bring different but equally valuable perspectives. So anyway, I digress. So for organisations wanting to invest in threat intelligence, where do you start? And as a provider of threat intelligence to organisations, where do you start educating your consumers about how they should go about it? The messages don't start with feeds. So most organisations, when they want threat intelligence, they sign up to a whole host of data feeds and hook them up to their SIEM. Threat intelligence, job done. So, and that's what half of the problem is, I think, is that people confuse threat feeds with threat intelligence. Indicators are not threat intelligence. This information can be used to help create and generate threat intelligence, or you can directly input it into your SIEM, and if it's validated, block and alert on it. But it just often creates more problems, and it just fills up your SOC analyst time. So the thing about threat intelligence at the moment is all about being predictive. That's the goal, really, of threat intelligence. But there are several steps that I think need to be understood within an organisation that can help reach that goal and be happy that their threat intel service is really being fully utilised. And we've seen customers that expect threat intelligence to tell them what they don't know when they don't even know what they do know to start off with. It's quite exhausting. So quite often when we talk about threat intelligence, we refer to the crystal ball moment. It's that moment when we're speaking to customers about threat intelligence and they tell us they just want to know when they're going to be attacked next. It's not just about that. If we knew that, there would never be any crime. So my response to that question is always, well, what have you got that they would want? What are your crown jewels? And then we focus the protection and the conversation around how we protect that. And there are clear ways in which you can do that. So I think, as already been mentioned, the intelligence cycle is a really good place to start. So we use the intelligence cycle to drive our business and everything that we do in security. We set out our priorities based on the output of this cycle, and we also set our intel requirements on it as well. And the most important part is the planning and direction stage. And this is the problem. Most organisations get it wrong, and they start off with the collection stage. They go out and they look for vendors producing threat intelligence, and they find vendors that have the easiest to use interface or the most data. And then they wonder why it's not producing anything of value and why it's producing so many false positives they can't possibly cope with it. Threat intelligence is rubbish. So my advice is to take a step back. Start with planning, start with your direction, and then you'll be able to determine what it is you need, what you want to protect. What are the greatest risks facing you as an organisation in the industry? What is it that you as an organisation are most worried about losing? What are your crown jewels? And then after that, how are you going to use it? And this is the most important thing that organisations get wrong. They just say, okay, I've got a feed, great. Don't know how I'm going to use it. So let's talk about some of the ways in which you can use threat intelligence to enhance your business operations. We partner with several vendors, one of which is Recorded Future, and they're a big advocate of threat intelligence being integrated into security operations. So I'm going to do a really, really unscientific poll with the audience. So just by a show of hands, how many people in this room have a dedicated threat intelligence team in their own organisation? Oh, okay, that's good. That doesn't count as twice. Okay, how many of those are embedded in your security operations in your SOC? Okay, not so many. That's interesting. Because I think threat intelligence is not just the responsibility of a single team. It can be leveraged by a whole host of different units. And it can add value across all security functions, as shown here. I think a dedicated team is best, but I think it needs to sit close and be really integrated into your incident response teams, your security operations, threat hunting, vulnerability management. If it sits on its own, it often has the effect of just doing its own thing and not necessarily communicating with the right teams in the right way in a timely fashion. So I'm just going to talk about, I'm running out of time rapidly, so I'm just going to talk about just one of these, and that is threat analysis. So if you've got a threat research or a threat discovery team within your organisation, how do they know what to look for? Threat intelligence is what should help point them in the right direction. And it should also help coordinate and prioritise the proactive workload of other security defenders across your organisation. So stealing the tasking and coordination process from law enforcement, which is my background, you can use that process to manage and collate the intelligence process and the activity workload across the various teams. And it's so much easier because you then have accountability and actions and ownership of tasks. So the type of information that you can feed into your security leadership teams, for example, will help then, once you've coordinated all of your threat discovery activity, informed by threat intelligence to be looking in the right areas, you feed that into your security leadership team, and it can help decision makers to get ahead of attacks, plan for resources being in the right place at the right time, according to the additional context you've actually gained, and whether there's an emerging threat that's likely to affect them directly or indirectly. And I think once you know what you want and how you want to use it, you can then start working out what sources you would provide that would provide you with the data that you need, what technology can help you aggregate that data, and what people that you need to produce some output, and what process you need to put in place to streamline that activity. So I hope from today that if you're a provider of threat intelligence, you've really got on board and take responsibility for producing quality threat intelligence. And if you're a consumer, I hope that you really take away from this a little bit more knowledge about what you should be asking your vendor for. So in terms of how do we get out of the trough, how do you use threat intelligence to get up the slope of enlightenment where it actually means something and adds value to your organisations? So if you only remember 2 things from today, it should be this. Threat intelligence should be able to provide and tell you as an organisation what the real risks are to you as a business from a security perspective. It can only do that when it's integrated into your business processes and it understands what your processes are. Number 2 is understanding your risks, and it should help you identify and provide focus to be able to mitigate those risks efficiently and effectively. Thank you very much for listening.